I don't have a lot of faith that that's going to happen. It's always going to be going towards shareholders and bottom lines and not worrying about the Scotts and the Biancas and the Kurts of the world. And quite frankly, we've sucked at enforcing cybersecurity and data privacy. AI is allowing that to expand at an exponential rate. So do I think we need to start over?
So I think we need to think about the regulatory opportunity always and how to strengthen, but also what are all the other things we can do on the demand side, on the consumer side, on the buyer side, on the business side, because we have to. Like, it's not going to fully, just history has never shown us that the law does all the things, right?
Hello and welcome to Irrational, our February 2026 edition. We're talking about artificial intelligence today. We got a couple of excellent guests for you. I'm sure you're going to find very engaging. First, we got Bianca Wylie, who is an entrepreneur and a public interest technology advocate. She's the founder of T&S Advisory, a consulting firm that offers strategic innovation guidance and capacity building for small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofit organizations. She's also a partner at Digital Public, where she works on public interest, technology, and governance. Welcome, Bianca. Good to have you with us. We also have Scott Beck, who is the CEO of a fast-growing cybersecurity and IT services firm called Beck Tech. He's a two-time international best-selling author and award-winning speaker, including appearances at NASDAQ and the Harvard Club of Boston. Co-star of the Amazon documentary Cybercrime and Cybercrime Fallout, Scott is a frequent TV celebrity guest expert with appearances on CTV, Global, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, and the CW. Scott, welcome.
With all of that and $2, I can still get a coffee at Tim Hortons, so it's awesome.
I love it. I love it. You know, guys, I don't even think we have a hope of covering everything that artificial intelligence has going on, and it's going to change tomorrow morning. The day this launches on the 15th, we're already going to have changes in what artificial intelligence is bringing to our world. Let's start off with a nice light question, okay? Compared to other professional industries, Bianca, what makes AI uniquely challenging to govern? And does it need a fundamentally new approach to oversight?
So I think the uniquely challenging to govern part, I don't know that it is. I think a lot of the way it's being treated is too high level and abstract. So people are talking about it sort of very up high and AI and in general terms. And a lot of it is, computational method and statistics and mathematics. And it really depends how you're using AI, because that would drive how governance should really be designed. So I think that the struggle right now is that we're talking at a very high level, whereas the opportunity is often to think about what do we do about this in context, in use, in a specific industry, in a specific sector, because then we remember everything that we already know. So I think it's important that the world is still the world. The material reality in which we exist is all still there. The business models, the incentives, they're all still there. So I think we have to be careful not to get blown away by what I would say there's a lot of hype. There's real change and there's real technology development happening. But I think the governance question is, can we talk in specific terms and talk about uses and talk about the real world of it, not the high level. And then the second part of the question, if you can remind me.
Yeah, just does it require a fundamentally new approach to oversight?
I don't think so. I don't think it does. I think it's a mistake to do that, because then I think we lose all the institutional knowledge, all the lessons from all the places where the patterns are similar. I think novel technologies will continue to exist in the world. There's going to be waves of them. There's going to be market reactions. All of this stuff will keep happening. So I think we need to really zoom out a bit and say, what are the fundamentals of law and policy and good governance? And how do we apply those to this? But I don't think we want to build all entirely new everythings for it, because I would also say that kind of keeps us away from the reality, and it keeps kind of building castles in the sky of what ifs and then what if. And it's like, no, we got a lot of existing history, and AI's been around for a long time. So in terms of looking at how it is and isn't governed well right now is a better place to start. But no. Straight answer, no, I don't think we need fundamentally new all the things for AI.
Okay. So, Scott, go ahead.
If I just piggyback on that, my concern and challenge, being a cybersecurity guy, I've got trust issues to begin with. So to think that these large companies are going to implement and do things to the betterment of the end users on their own that might cost them some money, I don't have a lot of faith that that's going to happen. It's always going to be going towards shareholders and bottom lines and not worrying about the Scotts and the Biancas and the Kurtz of the world. And quite frankly, we've sucked at enforcing cybersecurity and data privacy. AI is allowing that to expand at an exponential rate. So do I think we need to start over? No. Do we need to enhance and actually maybe have some sort of governance? Because quite frankly, right now in Canada specifically, our privacy laws are really weak, and making sure stuff is being secure and kept in-house, if you will, and not out in the world isn't there. And we're now rushing to this new front where, as Bianca's saying, different companies are going to use AI in different ways. Where's the stuff being stored? Who's responsible for it? What happens if it gets hacked? ChatGPT's already been hacked 6 times. I think it's 6 now. So, and this might go down a rabbit hole, but there's public learning models, which is available to everybody in the public if you're using the free ChatGPT. So anything you put in there is part of the public domain now, and it's sitting on their data centers, servers. So if you put something private in there, maybe you're looking at mental health issues or sexuality or whatever, and you're asking ChatGPT, that's all going in there and it's being associated to you. And Chat, as you just said, has been hacked 6 times. What's been the repercussions to ChatGPT? It continues to grow, get bigger, get stronger, and people are making money at it. So I think we have to put some sort of framework around it, but I don't think we need to be starting all over again. And this isn't coming from a place of fear. It's coming from a place of 20 years, businesses haven't been doing really great at taking care of this stuff to begin with. And now we're going to be putting a lot more stuff in there a lot faster. What are we going to do with it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if I can add
Yeah,
one more
of
thought
course.
here, I think that everything Scott's saying, and if we go to the history of regulation to date, we need to remember that the government is so excited about the economic development and innovation opportunities that these companies may present. This is the narrative, that the idea that they're both going to be, and this is where in Canada it's particularly borderline comic, that the same ministry that's in charge of boosting the industry is also supposed to be reining it in. Like these responsibilities, no matter what you say from a good governance perspective, you don't ask them to live in the same house because it doesn't make sense. And so I think like this is a longer, older problem where the incentive isn't there from the government to regulate for all purpose and all cause. And so I think, yes, we need a regulatory piece, but we also need to acknowledge that truth that they're not going to be also being punitive toward the companies that they're saying that, you know, the story. We don't want to rein in innovation. We don't want to dampen the economic development opportunity, right? So that's going on. And so I think we need to think about the regulatory opportunity always and how to strengthen, but also what are all the other things we can do on the demand side, on the consumer side, on the buyer side, on the business side, because we have to. Like, it's not going to fully, just history has never shown us that the law does all the things, right? So I think this is needs a mixed approach, but I think that constraint on what the government will even do is important to keep in mind.
So if we're looking at like public infrastructure, or public, some type of a regulation process for artificial intelligence, would it be more towards like a utility style, like a power company, the internet, like where it feels like sometimes deregulation leads to higher costs for the end consumer because of a lack of competition, say, or should it remain privately controlled, however, with some oversight? Scott, why don't you start on that? Where do you land there?
Well, I've yet to see a government department make something super nice or better. What do I mean by that? You know, you mentioned utilities. The government's not going to be able to fund at the level it needs to do to stay ahead of these developments. I mean, we have these large mega companies, they're spending billions with an S and multiple on data centers around the world to be able to handle all of this infrastructure. So to think the government's going to somehow get involved and develop this stuff and move it forward, I think is a fallacy. I do believe we need to have some guardrails around the private companies that are investing, because in business, what's the point of a business? It's to generate money. That's it. I mean, that's what the bottom line is to a business. Now, we need to put some framework around it so that the business isn't doing it harmfully. But to think the government's going to step in and suddenly develop billions of dollars when we're already running major deficits on something they don't understand, I think would be a fallacy, would be the wrong road to go down.
Bianca, do you have anything you want to add to there?
Yeah, I think two things. One is in line with what Scott's saying, the amount of money we'd actually have to invest to be anywhere near publicly owned, operated anything here is so it's a lot of money because this is like we're into probably I don't know the number. We're at hundreds of billions. I think trillion is plausible in terms of the existing computing infrastructures that are privately held. And I think that we have housing crises. We have so many other things that to me, it's really hard to make an argument, even just on the basis of like, what are our burning and urgent problems in the country? And it's just hard for me to even imagine that, even if it was on the table so that's one thing. And I think to Scott's point, what I think is a very Canadian method with this stuff is to perform like we're doing the thing, but not to fund it properly. I'd say this is more in the innovation side than on other public services and where I think the government performs well with increasingly reduced amounts of money. And then the second thing I was going to say is just I think that we need to be careful with assigning this technology the same utility as literally these utilities like water, like electricity. Like it has not proven to have that general purpose value. And, there's so much confusion right now about the value of use. Like, is productivity even going up? Unclear. Are we just creating new mess beside old mess? And then, like, if you have to use AI, but then you have to check your work, so I am hesitant to even assign it that level of like tested high technology, that I think when we have these commodity conversations, we know why and how we manage water and water systems or electricity systems. And I think the business model of all of that is a mess, but I don't even think AI should live in the same, this isn't like apples to apples to me.
Well, and Bianca, wouldn't you agree or think, electricity is electricity. So you can do it nuclear, you can do it solar. I mean, there's methods to do it, but electricity is electricity. When it comes to AI, we're from end user using it like a Google 2.0 all the way up to businesses that are building out agents that can replace humans. This isn't a one size fit. It's not a computer, right? So which focus of AI would the government go into? And what does that look like? The field is too afar. That's why there's going to be specialist companies that are going to be doing this.
Yeah. Yes. And I think
it would be awful hard.
No, and I also like to your point, to me, this is more like a technique and it has just so many different methods. And I think even, decades and decades ago, there was concern even within the computer science community, like, don't call this intelligence because this is not like you can call this, there was a lot of silly, clunky, advanced computing, like names that aren't as exciting sounding as intelligence. But I do think that between the computer science community and then the idea of intelligence as a marketing term, and we've seen it, business intelligence, like it's not new to just try to put intelligence on something. But I think we really need to be careful about like, how is this packaged versus what is it actually doing? Like, is this, efficiencies or automation? Those are more the techniques that are happening here. And I think that's a different conversation than water and power.
Well, again, water and power are doing specific things. And the analogy I've used an awful lot with business owners I'm talking to is think of healthcare. The overall goal of healthcare is to try to keep you alive and keep you healthy and not be in pain. You can't say that about AI. There are so many different use cases. There's no overarching North Star of what AI is going to do. Water, we're going to get water into your house, in and out. With electricity, we're going to get all your stuff in your house powered. We're going to get your EVs powered. There's very specific North Star. AI does not have that.
Yeah. And you've just reminded me of one of the best ways someone spoke to me about this was, and this relates to privacy and legislation, that they said, when we enacted privacy legislation, we could all have different ideas of what privacy is, and that's fine. And privacy in the private sector, public sector, whatever. But you knew what you were arching at, right? The Privacy Act. The Privacy Act, we know what we're trying to do with the regulation. If you say something like AI Act, what? Right? Like, to me, this was a crystallization of Scott's point, is it's like, yeah, okay, but AI what? Like what? It's not a thing that you can say has that same North Star of like, oh, we know what we're trying to accomplish by regulating. So if you don't even have that, you can imagine that the regulatory process gets very silly, is kind of the state of play in some of the Canadian conversations. I think it's at different levels of sophistication in different areas, but I think that is not a minimal problem here.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not just a Canadian problem. This is happening in jurisdictions around the world as we continue to rush into this new technology. So when I went to computer school, 3 weeks ago, they used to they used the analogy of air. Like the Wright brothers flew on Monday, and you landed on the moon on Saturday. That was how fast computers went.
Yeah.
Well, that with AI and what's being done, that has gotten even shorter and
Yeah.
shorter. I mean, things are going so quickly, almost weekly. There's new big breakthrough changes and new features and new things happening. I mean, it's just crazy the speed at which this is going, and it will impact us all. My fear is going to impact us all before we even figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a complete misunderstanding as well as to what artificial intelligence actually is compared to what the name connotates that it is, or like, for example, I'm watching people who are writing papers. They are diagnosing their illnesses. They are getting pictures and shopping lists and spreadsheets out of this software called artificial intelligence, and they're trusting it with some big decisions in their life, but the thing can't figure out yet that humans only have 5 fingers, right? And I'm watching this play out. And then on the other part of the world, you go to Albania, where they appointed artificial intelligence as a minister to help them root out things like government corruption and things like this. Like, it seems like this thing that we don't have our arms wrapped around, let alone our minds wrapped around, is being given a platform, undeserved perhaps. What do you think are the greatest risks that are posed today as a result of this AI thing?
Well, that can take the whole day right there on that discussion. I'm very interested to hear what Bianca has to say. From a high level, I'm fearful of how this is going to impact our thought processes overall, because already people get this readout from ChatGPT or whatever they're using. And obviously, it's the end all be all because AI told me so. And it's just not true. Like, what a lot of people don't understand, at one point, ChatGPT, it's a researcher, goes out to the internet, grabs the information and pulls it back and says, hey, based on what I found, here's the answer. And it will always give an answer. Even if it doesn't find it, it's going to tell you something. But it was using Reddit and Wikipedia as its two main sources or truth sources. And I'm sorry, folks, if you've never heard of Reddit, it's basically the cesspool where everybody goes to complain, or paper tigers think they can pound their chest and say how smart they are. It is not research. It's not nuance. It's opinion. So
Mhm.
ChatGPT was taking opinion and feeding it back to you and telling you this is the answer. And we've seen people go, oh, well, it's got to be true. And now people that actually have the knowledge of an industry, doctors, IT, regulatories, now we've got to go back and try to re-educate, which is pretty hard to do in some cases because people can get pretty dug in, and tell them why what AI told them is incorrect. So from that level, it's concerning. And the other one is, I think it's going to impact our ability to do critical thinking.
Yeah. Bianca, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm glad Scott started there because I think some of these are really deep and important issues, and they're not regulatory shaped necessarily. So I'll say that, like, I think a good example of this is to have seen the impact of ChatGPT et al. On higher education and even middle school, high school. If we had strong regulation, it wouldn't change the fact that teachers are contending with this completely unsupported. They're not getting institutional support. We're not having good conversations about, okay, this is out here, what are we doing? And it then ricochets back to them using software against the students to see if it is, like it just antes up into a technical thing when it's a cultural thing. That what are we losing by not considering ourselves with critical thinking, with process? Writing, the point of writing isn't the output, it's the process. Like, you think when you write, and when you revise and when you edit. And like, a lot of people that I know use some of these tools quite productively and happily in creative work. Like, I'm not saying, I think this is a for some people yes, for some people no thing. But I do think that that example for me is why we've got issues here. And this points to my second concern, which is really maybe the largest one, is when you've got a society that is so sort of scarcity minded, like when everyone's at the edge of time availability and they're time poor and they're cash strapped, tools like this become that much more appealing to use. Oh, I'll just ask this instead of having to book a trip to the therapist, or because even booking the trip to even booking the therapist is hard. So then suddenly this availability and convenience is incentivized by the fact that like we don't have great wraparound services. And Canada is where it is with some of this, and some of it's okay and some of it's bad. Like you can, and I think about this globally too. Like if people already don't want to go to the hospital, this is a pretty appealing option to try to get some help, right? So I think that is not a contained within AI problem, but I'm just sharing that because I think it's accelerating trouble in areas that were before. So it's very hard to tell someone like, oh, it's unreasonable to use this when it's like actually like students and schooling. I get what it is to be overwhelmed and stressed out and you want to do something fast. And then here's this thing, right? Like,
Well, we're already seeing people using AI. They're on their phones. You can see the TikToks where they're walking around with their phone saying, "Hey, this is what's going on," and they're talking to AI as if it's their best buddy, or they're having a bad mental health day, and they're going to AI to seek information. And as I just described, AI is going out and searching not the best places. It's not like going into medical research fields to come back with really good informed information. It's getting what it can publicly find. And to me, that's scary. And I don't mean this to be AI is like the end of the world. Not saying that,
mhm.
but that's where this is a public entity. The companies are trying to make money and they're not necessarily worrying about the consequences of where this goes. I mean, I'll share with you. We've already seen where people will go to ChatGPT, ask it a question, and then take the answer because they still don't understand it and then say, what's this mean? Okay, that's not the end of the world. I'm glad they're trying to get better education. I'm more concerned about the 14, 15-year-old stuck in their bedroom that has been ostracized because they've been cyber bullied because social media is a cesspool of its own. And it's now trying to use an AI tool as some sort of substitute as a friend or mental health. And this didn't mean to go that dark, but we're seeing it. It's
Yeah.
happening.
We are.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to, because building on that, I don't know if you've heard I think it was Mark Andreessen made this statement decades ago now about like software eating the world, this idea that it was just going to sort of like worm its way into. And what I think about on a more personal, cultural, granular level is what all of these things do to relationships. There's a very well-known like technology theorist in Toronto. Her name's Ursula Franklin. She's passed away, but she used to talk about how technology can reduce or eliminate reciprocity. And I think like that's the kind of level of like relationship, like when you stop practicing with other people, relationships are hard and they're challenging and there's friction. So I think like this is in it, if you want to have a good democracy, you want to have healthy relationships, you have to practice and you have to like deal with friction. And so I think all of these things that just smooth and like it looks like, oh, it's easier and it's going to tell me what I want to hear. And, like in a tone that makes me feel good. That's not the way the world works. And I think the other thing that for me, the reason I'm particularly wanting to point to the Canadian context a little bit is that other countries are looking at this, I would say, in a more serious regulatory way. Like, I just want to warn Canadians that there is such a sense of like, we've done pioneering research in the field and we want to have winners and we want to show up, that there is like a very not serious approach being taken to regulation. And that is where Canada, I have what do I want to say here? Limited confidence in like law has a role. It can do some things great, but like specifically what Canada is doing really shouldn't have people feeling like, oh, it's fine if a law gets passed. Because I think what's evidenced by our conversation is so many of these impacts are cultural. The efficiency is never going to be illegal, okay. And this relationship things, these do not fit in a law box. So I think to close on my biggest concern here is that people feel this is inevitable because it will always be produced. I have this sort of long chain of, as long as we have defense spending and investments in industry, whether private, public, this stuff will show up.
Mhm.
So in some senses, it is, I wouldn't say inevitable, but it's very highly likely that this will continue to develop, evolve, and do it rapidly. But we need to feel power and authority and agency on what do we do with it. Like, just because there's a thing on the side of the road, you don't have to pick it up and use it, right? So I think like trying to work this problem a little bit more from the side where we do have choice and agency, like it will be there, but we need to have more conversations, I think, like these
Can
ones
you
where we're
imagine if we actually started teaching AI in school, proper use of it, what
right.
it can do, what it can't do, if we started younger? I mean, that's
Yeah.
in my vision, that's kind of where we go. I mean,
Yeah.
I joke that 3,000 years ago, we had hieroglyphics on a cave, well, or on the wall. Well, we have hieroglyphics now on a wall. It's called Facebook and social media. We've evolved back to where we were 3,000 years ago. And I don't necessarily think that's a good thing.
No.
Mm.
And I think that's such an important point because this is where these cultural pressures to be at the bleeding edge of technology ahead, and these are old, like this goes back centuries to cathedral building and going fast and innovating. The schools feel pressured to be like, oh, we must train you in the thing because it's the new thing. So they're not incentivized to come at it critically. You get AI faculty, faculty and universities feeling pressured to use it. Public libraries are getting funded by the companies that are driving this so that they have a program, right? So it's really hard to find the places. I think our schools should 100% be doing the kind of teaching that Scott is talking about. And they're captured in a lot of ways ideologically by the idea that this, it's like you don't want to look like you're critiquing the thing or you're anti innovation or you're anti
Mhm.
progress. Like if we want to prepare the youth, we must teach them the new ways, right? And it's like, nah. Oh, like, so I wish. And then I look at the reality and I'm like, how do we push for these institutions to do their job properly? Because, like, it is like getting people bought into AI is not the job of the public library system nor the education system. Like,
No,
full
that's
stop.
right. That's right. Exactly. If anything, it's probably more from the idea of what do I do with this thing that is inevitably going to be gaining a greater presence in our world? How do I navigate that? The same way I would teach
That's right.
somebody how to manage money or to make decisions or to manage time. More from that perspective. I definitely understand what you're saying there. You touched on the relationship thing. I probably should be careful saying this, but I have a friend of mine who has a coworker who basically has a relationship with their artificial intelligence. I don't know which one they're on. Like they're popping up now every week, like restaurants or something like that. But it's scary to think that that is what is like we take already a technology that seems to alienate us, and now we go further into that with something that can communicate back to us with words and language that we like, that make us feel good, that affirm us. And I don't know, it
Well,
just seems like
10
a
years
scary thing.
ago, 11 years ago, on The Big Bang Theory, if you know the TV show, Raj, one of the characters, fell in love with Siri because he could ask Siri things and Siri would answer.
Yeah.
That was foreseen a decade ago. The problem is we're actually there. We're past Siri because Siri's not just giving short answers. There's full conversations. It gives a different sense. But isn't it kind of weird that over a decade ago, people saw this
Yeah,
coming?
absolutely. So what does responsible AI look like? Like, what does it even mean, responsible AI, and who should have authority over it?
Bianca, you take this one first.
Well, I'll start by saying that I don't think these words like responsible, ethical, safe can ever be affixed to a product to say this is an ethical product. This is a responsible AI. Like it's some kind of packaging. And then, it's because of how it's constructed. So I think we need to do away with that thing and think about the responsibility in choice, in use, in how use is managed and how decisions are made and how ongoing governance happens. So I think to be responsible is, especially right now, one of the most important things I think for business owners, for institutions to be doing is do due diligence. Just stop for a second before you just get caught in the wave and ask yourself, like, what problem are we trying to solve in our business? What is it that is our competitive advantage, or where are we struggling or where might we want to do something? Like that's a very, like, what problem are you trying to solve here? Not what do I do with this thing? So, because so much of what I'm seeing is people being like, we need an AI strategy. I'm like, you're on the wrong foot because there is no solution for use there. So you have to figure this out. So I think responsibility lies in, have you done your homework on what this is and doing and what it's not doing or how you would want to use it? What are you going to do? Can you reverse your decisions that you've made? If you're going to use something, can you take it back? Can you stop using it? Are you building dependencies on it? Like, there's a whole slew of what I would say are pretty standard governance questions before you adopt or make a decision or make a purchase. And I also think there's room in responsible use of AI to be really serious about the terms. Like, if you're negotiating a deal or if you're thinking about bringing something into a workflow, that some of the traditional, because there's a difference here, traditionally you could look at a product and say, okay, yes, no. What's happening with some of these AI products is they're not hitting a procurement trigger. They're just being injected into your existing systems. And I think like that's something that you need to not just go with the flow on. If you have software systems and there's an update and something's there that wasn't there before, don't just let that roll. I think you need to be responsible to see that it happened and think about the consequence. So to me, I'm talking a little bit in the high level here, but I just want to point to the fact that responsibility, it vests in people. Do not look at it as a product thing, and do not look at it as like, oh, I used this standard, so now it's responsible. No, it's a human responsibility, is a human quality. So I think just making sure we don't think someone's going to sell you this some kind of AI and you're good to go. To me, that doesn't exist, because even if it's a public model or anything or private whatever, you can still do harm in use. So you focus on what are you actually doing with the thing, not
So
the
the
idea.
analogy I like to use is, think of tools. We have lots of different tools at home. You won't take a hammer to paint the wall. AI is the same idea. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? I'd like to paint my wall. Then you go get the proper tool to get the job done. AI is the same way. And what I'm seeing with a lot of business owners at the moment is that maybe they're a little bit older, maybe they're not as tech savvy. The younger people in the organization are already starting to use AI in that company without any guidance, without any impacts to how things are going. We can't be ostriches and put our head in the sand and think this is going away. It's not. It's going to accelerate. So when I've been talking with business owners, I keep like, Bianca touched on it, the difference, just the basics. What's the difference between a private learning model and a public learning model? And the easy thing is, are you paying for it? If the answer is no, then you are the product. They're giving it to you free, but you're the product. What you're using it, they're selling it for. And then the second one is, what guidelines are you going to give your staff about using AI? Is it okay to use it to help develop a marketing piece that you then have to make sure in your policy a human has to vet and go through it and make sure it's accurate? Because it's not always going to be 100% accurate. What type of data are you going to allow to be put into that AI? Those are the conversations that need to be happening. And quite frankly, Kurt, right now for a lot of businesses, I'm not talking users, a lot of businesses, they're still stuck on, they don't know the difference between a private and a public. We're still trying to educate them on that, but they have staff that have already implemented it. They're already 15 miles down the road or 15 kilometers down the road because we're in Canada. See, look, I was being fully bilingual there, my American and my Canadian. Yeah. But they'll be 15 kilometers down the road before ownership even knows. It's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube, right?
Yeah.
Like once it's already out, now you got to try to deal with it.
Yeah. And to build on thoughts for that, one of them is like, people going off this, it's like what's happening formally and then what's happening informally, just to be very clear that is like something to not make it scary to approach a team and be like, hey, like, we know this is going on, so let's sit down and think about it together, not in that sort of punitive, like, or expecting abstinence or, whatever we wait. Like, this is not how this is going down. And then the other thing, which I think relates to your question about responsibility and some of what Scott's talking about with like what organizations need to do, is that you need to have, and because we've talked a lot about speed here, is maintenance. Because like ethics, some of the most important parts of like practicing ethics is you go back to a decision you made and you ask yourself, is this still the right decision? Because this is not a point in time policy that you draft it and then you're like, great, see you in a couple of years. This is the kind of thing that if you're going to get into it, you're going to need to commit maintenance and oversight and revision and adaptation and not being scared that you made a mistake. Actually, you know what? This is not good. Let's roll this back. That's part of responsible use, and that's part of ethics, is that you check your work once
and
it
ethics
starts
can be
going.
situational.
Yes. And contextual, absolutely.
It almost sounds like what I'm hearing almost from both of you here is that really the question should shift a little bit from who should regulate AI to who should regulate the users of AI, like our own self-governance of how we will apply and use this crazy technology that's growing faster than we can type the next question into Grok, DeepSeek, Gemini, ChatGPT, and so on. When
It
it
kind of goes
comes,
back, Kurt, just to that point you're saying.
Mhm.
Bianca touched on it about ethics. Cyber criminals and organized cyber gangs, which is what they are, their businesses, they are so far down the road with AI right now. One time when we try to teach people how to spot scams, usually it was language and spelling and grammar. AI has changed that. That's not a problem anymore. They're using this to further their thing. So it's not just, where I'm going with this is we can't expect ethics is going to save us on it, because some of us might have some good moral compass. And, I can make a lot more money as a hacker, but unfortunately I was born with a moral code and I was brought up by my parents and I couldn't sleep with myself that way. But there's those that don't have an issue with it.
Yeah, and I think too that I think getting this public education going, that like this is going to keep rolling off the assembly line, so to speak, right? And so the idea that it's not fair in some ways, and life is not fair in many ways, to put this on the general population, but here we are. And I think like this is maybe one point that I think both of us really want to get through here, is just because it's out here doesn't mean it's working well, that it's going to protect you, that your baseline, that your expectations of privacy or consent or any of these things are in play. And it's confusing for people. I just want to say to everybody listening that like this isn't a great situation. You're not supposed to be doing homework on whether or not this is a dangerous thing if it's out in the market, right? And this is why I really do feel that governments have lost the plot with like, okay, we want this to be out here. And then it's okay that it's out there, but the government's role really should be more toward the public health and the advocacy and the literacy. And they're like, okay, like we're finding some kind of balance. It's just so unbalanced at the moment to just be like, this is new, this is cool, this is great, you should use it, da 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 da. And that's fully driven by an economic development priority, which if it was a piece of the approach, less of a problem, but it's such a dominant tone. And so I'm frustrated that people are getting stuck using things where that the broader context is not being shared properly. And I'm also annoyed because who has time for this? And I'll close by saying like one of the key reasons that we have things like standards in building code, whatever else, building code standards, let's take it. This doesn't map well to technology. But imagine if every time you had to go into a building, you had to stop outside and be like, I wonder what the structural integrity of this building is like. Like, should I read all this? Like you couldn't function. So this is where, to me, there's a real institutional failure because we're pushing this work onto people at a scale that, much like these long notices of consent, it's not viable, it's not functioning properly. So I really want to not give anyone listening the sense that it's like right that they have to think about all this complexity. They should just know that it's not good to go here, like your interests are not being protected to the extent that you might think, right? Not to be scary. I don't like operating from fear, but like you have to be able to say the truth about some of the state of play,
I've got peers that will make fun of me because I'm a technology guy, but I'm also the first one to say, hey, do you remember when email was going to make our lives easier because you didn't have to pick up the phone and leave voicemail and play voicemail tag? Well, as long as you got back to that email within 24 hours, that was acceptable at the time. Then along came text messages where people were expecting responses within minutes. Technology has always been sold to us as it's going to make our lives easier. And it does, but also speeds things up. And I think that's what we're seeing with AI is that, yes, there's use cases where it's going to help us save some time, but man, you got to invest some time to figure out how to use it.
Yes.
Just saying, hey, I've got chat. My mother, before she passed, was using some ChatGPT, and it was kind of cute because she was using it basically as a Google 2.0. She thought, look, she heard about AI and ChatGPT, and there's other ones out there, but I'll pick on them because everyone seems to know that name. And she'd just go in and ask it a basic question, like you would in a web browser with Google. And she was quite content because she was using AI. Okay, if that's your comfort level, that's wonderful. But there's a lot more promises that are behind it. and it could potentially save us some time, but you got to invest some time to get there, if that is making sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a cutting edge sword. It'll save us time, but we got to invest the time and some critical thinking processes to get there.
Yeah. I think privacy is going to be an interesting part of all this as well, like actually protecting people's privacy in amongst the use and the growth of artificial intelligence. Like I'm amazed. I just asked ChatGPT about me, and it's amazing what it's able to tell me about things I've done in my past, like as far as vocationally. I mean, if it's ever on the internet, it's there, like who my family is, who I'm connected to. When you ask these questions, it's pretty scary what comes back sometimes and what artificial intelligence is able to reveal about ourselves. What level do you think protecting privacy, how concerning is this? Where I'm asking this from is when I talk to people about artificial intelligence, there's a genuine fear among people about what this is going to mean. I think we all watched the Terminator movie from the 90s, Arnold Schwarzenegger with the pump action 12 gauge and the
Skynet.
Harley Davidson motorcycle and the cool shades. We Skynet, exactly. We have this fear of that. When I hear people associate that when they're talking about their own personal privacy and the use of artificial intelligence, then you get into social credits and things, right? Like Bianca, when you're talking about privacy protection, what does that look like for you? What does that mean when you use that?
I'm going to jump on that one because
Wanted this to be a Scott one. Yeah.
Okay.
we already suck at the data that's being collected on the internet already. I have had to deal with and come in and clean up cyber events that have led to lost money, have led to people's personal information that they've given to someone and thought they were going to be, because it's a company that they trusted, we're going to take really good care of it. They got hacked. People are running free AVG and think that's antivirus, by the way, and people think that that's good enough. It's not. And this hacking happens. Under our Canadian law currently, it's up to the companies to self-out themselves, to say, hey, I just had an event. Sorry about that, ombudsman. And the ombudsman's going to say, hey, what reasonable protections did you put in place? And my version of reasonable is going to be different than yours, Kurt. It's going to be different because there is no standard. So I'm going to tell you that right now, security already sucks. Our data privacy already sucks. And I'll give you a different little analogy. We had some pushback from somebody at one of our clients who was like, I don't want to put that app on my phone. Well, what's the concerns about putting the company app on your phone? Well, it could track us and tell where it's at. Yet they already had Temu. They already had, they're already giving all the stuff away. Like if your fear is that the Chinese government's going to get your information, you already gave it away. You did it on social media. Like we're already doing that. So what I try to explain to people is data privacy, while we hope it's really, really good, isn't. And if you don't want it to get out there, don't put it online. And that brings me back around to why do I think governments have to have some sort of guidelines around this? We don't have good guidelines now. We don't have your small, medium-sized businesses say, hey, I can save some money and not invest in my technology or my security, and they're getting away with it because there's no repercussions when things happen badly, except if they can't operate. But there's no punitive. There's nothing that says, Kurt Parks, if you're going to be taking Scott's voice and face and putting it in a data center somewhere, you have to put protections in place so nobody can go in, steal that, and then use that as a deep fake somewhere. I have to trust you that whatever things you've put in place are going to protect me from that. And sadly, because there's no real guidelines or lack of a better term, a beating stick when someone screws up, yeah, privacy is a big concern, and I don't see this getting taken care of anytime soon. Sorry, I'll get off my high horse now.
No, I'm glad you're there. I want to build on top of it, which is to say that my concern, because privacy is not a domain I've spent a ton of time in, but what I've seen as a characteristic of it, is that it's like an enabling function. So it's like, oh, if it's privacy preserving or if it's compliant or if it's whatever. And then people are like, must be fun. And you completely stop asking the question as to like, should we be doing this? Like privacy doesn't answer the question of, is this a good idea? And we've talked so far about several cases that have nothing to do with privacy, that have to do with cultural consequence, relationships, critical thinking skills. Like these things are connected in a way that I think, and that false sense of security in the privacy regulation, even at its best, there's all kinds of other issues with like access to justice, or like, do you have the time to bring a case? And like, it's all quite wild to think that that is functioning now, because it's not. So I just want to like reiterate Scott's point and then bring it up to that, like I'm saying up because it's like that whole frame does a disservice to the questions that we need to ask about, wait a second, is this a good idea? Because sometimes it's just not a good idea, regardless of whether it's privacy preserving or not. Like privacy has become a bit of an enabling function for technology. And the tech companies know that. So if they come out and say, oh, it's privacy preserving, the people are like, oh, okay, cool, must be fine. And it's like, no, we just skipped over like a major source of power and question and agency. So I think that's that one. And then the second thing I have that relates to privacy, and I think Scott would know more about this, but I have this concern about the fact that like, you'll hear these things where people will say that, people know more about you. The internet knows more about you than you know about yourself, or all the data, all the data that's collected and used and brokered and you're profiled and da, 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 da. If you move into the future of more AI use, you're getting beyond just the data. You're also getting into more tracking of your actions, like really literally, not just the GPS of like not the old school surveillance, which is, we carry around surveillance devices.
Right.
We're self-surveilling all the time. We're generating transcripts. We're just basically like out here with all of this data. But if you move into this future where you've got more like agentic, like handing responsibility for some of your decisions or actions over to a system, then you're really like adding a new layer of very well scribed activity. And Scott, I don't know if that does or doesn't resonate with, I think you're more technically in those weeds, but that's a concern that is a different privacy problem in a way, because it's not about is the data shared or not, or this or that. It's actually feels like it's a different level of like exposure of what you're doing that's more specific than the way data kind of guesses about what you are or who you are.
My view on it is because you're building out the agent, or the company's building out the agent, or you're using it, you're enabling it to gather more stuff about you, and you're giving it up faster. There's less need to have to go do the research. And there's a reason why these large entities, Apple, Meta, AWS, which is Amazon, why they're spending billions of dollars on data centers. And these data centers are now going underground. They're being cooled by water. We haven't even touched on it, but there's a whole issue around the power grid and the amount of power these things need to generate. But why do they need all these big data centers? Because the volume of data that is now being collected and given, and AI is just going to make this faster. And we suck now at privacy. It's not going to get any better. Do I think the government's going to be able to write a law and solve all of this? I don't. But could they at least give some repercussions if people make really bad choices willingly? I think they can, and they should, and there should be some punishment for that. Like if I, as a company, decide to take all of your information and not do anything to secure it, whether it's AI or not, and because I was a terrible steward of that information and it now gets out in the public, there should be some repercussions for that because of my poor decision making.
There's two things about that. One of them is that like I've had several people observe over the course of the last decade, and I know it's been longer than this, that software is one of these places where this sort of idea of warranty isn't there. There's just this sort of like, well, over to you, which
It's even worse than that. Because if you take your end user license agreements that you get, so when I love seeing let's use Facebook. So you'll see it goes around all the time. I do not give permission for Facebook to use my photos in any way. Yeah, you did. Because when you signed up for your account and there was that end user license agreement, you signed that away. You said, hey, it's not a problem, because you're given ownership of whatever you put in the system to Facebook. So it doesn't matter what you say that you can't use it. You gave it away. And here's the scarier part. These end user license agreements have held up in court for different things. So we have private companies that are basically writing laws. And this isn't about AI. This is just the culture that's been happening over the last 15 years. How do you like me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Hang on, because I'm going to lose this thought because I meant to say this earlier, which is that we have predominantly in this conversation been talking about generative AI, which is the one that I think most listeners would be familiar with because they've used it themselves, right? So I think that's very important. And there's all of these harms and potential opportunity. Like, to be fair, there's people who use this stuff and into it, and all good, right? Like, we have to be open-minded to what is happening on a personal level. So, but parking that just for a second is to not forget that good old-fashioned AI and the rules-based sort of statistics, predictive analytics, like using AI to do things, to make decisions, for example, to look at people's credit, to look at someone's bail, to look at like using AI in those contexts is a very consequential application. And there is an intersection there with like, do we know how the decision was made? And how does this relate back to my life? And if I have to challenge something, does anyone even know how the decision was made? These are issues that have a different shape. And I don't want us to lose the fact that in some of these AI conversations, those are a different pack of problems it's because they're happening to you without you seeing it happening to you. So that's kind of like a different, this is like a different part of the bouquet of adventures we're having here with AI. But I meant to mention it earlier, and Scott, you probably have thoughts.
Everyday person.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick on Facebook again.
Okay,
So how many
good.
times have you heard people complaining about they've lost their business account because it violated some sort of rule at Facebook? And how do I get a hold of them so I can appeal it?
Right.
AI is the one that went through that, made that decision.
Right.
It determined it was, and best of luck trying to find support. So if you've just spent all this time, energy, money, you've advertised with them, you're trying to grow a business using that platform, and for whatever reason, AI has now said that post from 6 years ago breaches our current policy, where do you go? And we get
Yes.
those calls all the time. And it's like, well,
Yes.
folks,
Yes.
it is what it is.
Yes.
Go
Yeah.
ahead and send an email and they'll get back to you in 2029.
Yeah. No, this is so
But we're there.
important.
We're already there.
It's so important, Scott. That's such a great example too, because I think Kurt, and for me, I didn't get a great education about law, but I think like many people, you get the sense that the government says, well, we're regulating it. Then you're like, okay, cool, good, right. But no, like there's a whole other second chapter here, which is access to justice. And at the micro level in the example, like Scott's bringing here, right at the ground, what's your redress? Like if something is done to you and it impacts you, it's your path to getting it resolved. This is the problem. So like you can write all your rules and the whatever else you want, but what happens when you need the shorthand for this is often your rights are only as good as your access to them. So I think that's an important thing to remember is no one should get a false sense of security, even if there is a regulatory and things are that way. I think you can just talk to so many people who have had a hard time with redress.
So me as a citizen, should I have the right to know when AI is making decisions for me? Should I be able to opt out of that? Or from a company perspective, should I be able to not let Facebook? Or is it when I didn't read the end user agreement and clicked accept because I wanted my page on social media, did I just waive all of that?
A little bit of all of that. I won't name the particular company, but their end user license agreement had as many words as Shakespearean's Hamlet. Seriously, who's going to read that?
Yeah.
And the amount of stuff they stuff in there. But the other aspect is, we kind of have to make a decision because we're not suing Amazon. It's not going to happen. A government might be able to hold them accountable if they're willing to go that route, but it's our onus to decide how we're going to use these products. It's up to us. It's our free will and choice. Now, if I decide I'm going to work with, name a bank, and the bank's using AI, there is some ethics guidelines, like when content is written, they're supposed to be giving credit or enabled by AI, or they're supposed to make some sort of reference to it. Are all companies doing it? No, because again, it's kind of comes down to ethics. So should we expect it? Yes. Is it going to happen all the time? Oh,
Well, and I think as an example, we also have to think about what the consent is or isn't in real terms. So if you're you're looking for a job and you go to apply somewhere and they say, we are scanning resumes with AI, but you need a job. Like, okay, great. You told me. And now I just know that there's a potential harm on the other side of the wall, which is like better than not knowing and also isn't great, right? So it's like, are you really in a place to express that choice? And I think like opting out is another one. We're at a point, all of our laws are so focused on individual behaviors. And we're collective trouble problem set here. Like, you can opt out, and it is not going to change the fact that the population data set is still going to be used against you if that is so desired by whoever's using a data product. Like, it's just unfortunate and it can feel disempowering, but I think it's important not to think that by like not using the thing, you're safe, because unfortunately that's not the case. We are so interlinked with each other.
Yeah, definitely. So if Canada chooses a regulatory pathway, and Bianca, I think you touched on this briefly from the Canadian perspective of this, but should we align with what the US or what the EU is doing, or should this be a completely uniquely Canadian regulatory model?
Well, I know there's already talks happening in front of committees on Parliament Hill that it more closely aligns with the European security model than the American one. Now, is the European one perfect? No, nothing's going to be perfect, but it's more enhanced and better than ours. So I know those talks are happening. Now, how far it's going to go? We've had a change of government. It was under the past Liberal government, now the current one. I don't know what the timeframes are, but I'm familiar with people that have been on Parliament Hill and discussing these and making talks to committees. So I know that, sorry, I've been told that the discussions are leaning more towards a European model that restrictive but open-ended as well, as opposed to the American one that can be very restrictive in a very detrimental way. We could that would be a whole other session going into the regulatory stuff on it. But in Canada, the talk has been moving more towards the European. But Bianca may have even better insights than what I've got.
Well, I think there is this is all policy is in law is always like a trade-off discussion in terms of approach. So the few things that I think about is like, one, Canada, unfortunately, due to its size, kind of like if it's going to jack up requirements, restrictions, whatever, it has that possibility that people would be like, cool, nice rules, we're just not going to do business there. And that's a real thing. I wouldn't say it's everybody, but it's a factor. Two, if we look at the history of like the private sector data privacy law that we created around the year 2000, PIPEDA, was really created to harmonize the travel of data between countries. So it sounded, and it still does do data protection, not European style, but it does do the thing to say private companies need to have rules and method to manage your data. But the real impetus was to make sure that the data could travel as an asset internationally. So it's a business harmonization exercise, which is the direction we're going, because Europe wants the business, Europe wants the economic development, like all the country. We're kind of replicating that. So that to me is the direction of travel, which seems to rhyme with what Scott's saying. Like, I think that's the way we're going. And I think in some ways that's fine. Like, we borrow from a lot of, I would say Europe has done a little more thoughtful work on some of this, and they have taken things to potential red line, like this is just too dangerous and we're not going to do it, right? Like, so you can have opinions about that. And then the only third thing I'll add is that it's not going to happen. But what I would have liked to see happen in Canada is, and this goes back to where we started, we have specialized regulation per sector and per industry in cases where we need it. And for me, the financial, like the highly regulated industries, engineering, finance, like you can go through them. For me, I would prefer that we would have done the homework to say, how did we deal with all of this before? And how do we build on that sub-level, that subdomain of regulation that already exists for the highly regulated industries? Because statistics is not new to banking and accounting. Safety is not new to transport. I think that the contextual bearing of existing legislation would get us to better regulation. In a lot of cases, it wouldn't cover the whole field, but I wish we would do that. We didn't do that homework. We haven't really asked, like, what problems are we specifically trying to solve here? And I think ideally you would do all of that, and then you'd find your gaps. And then you would write very specific legislation that might be, and even if it would reduce business for certain types of product in Canada, like, fine, that's a cultural choice. But as you can both imagine, this is much more effort.
Yeah. Well, even regulating an AI ecosystem that is going to be extremely global with laws that are going to be essentially national presents its own levels of complications, I would think, just from that perspective there in and of itself. So does heavy regulation or does this entrench the power of larger innovators or corporations? And does it shut out the small guy, the little guy?
Well, they are the ones who have the money to be compliant with whatever is put out. That's kind of been the historical trajectory is there's big companies that they're like, sure, write the rules. I'll pay them, or I'll pay the penalty for not following them. And it's a cost of doing business. Like that's just sort of that's the problem. And this one place AI is different than what a lot of what we've seen historically is how centralized the power is in just a handful of firms. Like this is a very significant dynamic. And it's really going to be hard for anyone to consider themselves like, yes, I should be following, like my legal team is myself versus whatever Amazon's legal budget is.
But back to who's going to be playing in this space. What I've been seeing currently, it'll be people that say, hey, I've built out this AI engine. And then when you start digging into it, you find they're actually using what's called API or languages that are actually calling into OpenAI, ChatGPT, or they're using other ones. So what they're putting lipstick on the pig. They're not growing the pig is where I'm getting at. So you still have there's very few companies that can invest the level of money into AI and the programming and the infrastructure to have it. That you're not going to see the Bill Gates, Wozniak working in garages to create computer companies. We're beyond that. Will there be exceptions? Possibly. I mean, there's no way that I can know everything about everything. Nobody does, not even AI. But right now, where we're standing, these independent firms that are saying they're making AI, no, they're utilizing engines that have already been created, and they're making specific industries or specific purposes, but it's still going into one of the main ones. And I see it kind of like the cloud computing explosion. A decade ago, when people were talking about cloud, they didn't understand it just meant your data on somebody else's server. They thought it was some magical thing. I think that's what we're going to see with AI. A lot of people are going to enter the field, and at the end of the day, a decade later, there's like really 4 or 5 big entities, players that are there. And that's those same players that are in the AI space.
Yeah. And I also think like a few more things. One of them is to Scott's point to your question, Kurt, is that like given how centralized that is, it does mean that if there is something done, the consequence has a multiplier because it's happening to like the core and then the derivatives are also impacted, right? So there is something there, but then we have to never forget the business piece. People are so leveraged. Like the interest level in dampening what's happening here, like there's just this constant, we're at the casino level of, wow, people better uptake. Like we're too leveraged right now. So there's no, like, there was some study recently, what percentage of the economy is like floating through a lot of this hype cycle right now. Like it's not stable. And so I'm just saying that the incentive from the state side to regulate when they're hoping that this thing's going to catch and go, it just doesn't, like there's a incentives conflict. And then the other thing is that I don't want us to forget the wonderful world of standards where I think people have been looking at this, and this isn't helpful for the consumer side in all purposes, but there is a lot of good work that's been done over the years in the standards bodies that aren't law, but are people trying to look at stuff in a very specific, like a medical device or just to examples of like where people have already figured out in other cases, we need to be specific and careful about how we do the engineering around the use of a technology. So some of the standards bodies have been doing work on AI for a very long time. So I just want us to know, like, while the laws are not where they should be, there's also other people in different fields that have been working on making these things less harmful, I think is probably the best way to say it. And the final thing I want to say is because it relates back to money and goes back to what we were talking about at the small business, medium-sized, I would say for nonprofit level, the maintenance cost for even implementing these guidelines. Like I look at things like, these are our AI guidelines from, you say, World Health Organization or the Canadian Medical Association. And you read the guidelines and you're like, that is a good guideline. Okay, sure, hold the developer accountable for da-da-da. You're like, great. Whose job is that? It's no one's job. And there's no line item of money put toward that. So you also just need to be aware that, it's sort of this, it's the same version of the law at the level of the institutions or the businesses saying, we have AI guidelines. I'm like, cool, those are really nice. So who's upholding them? Oh, nobody is. Okay, great. So just like, there's a lot of sort of paper mache wrapper and then no money and no maintenance attention being paid which goes back to something Scott was really, I think, hammering on, which is that like that's the thing that's what you have to be doing. So there's a cost to this. So even if the benefits are there is a cost to doing it carefully, no matter how good the regulations, the policies, the guidelines, the standards are. We can't escape it. So I just don't want us to think that someone's going to do it for us, because it's not happening.
Wait, AI will do it for you.
It's interesting. Earlier we spoke about how AI isn't like power coming into your house. It isn't like water coming in and out of your house. But when I think about the potential impacts of artificial intelligence on everyday life, it seems like from one perspective, it has the potential to be even more intrusive than the power line or the water line into my house, and something that's going to be completely unavoidable. Like when the internet came out, if you didn't want to participate in that, you just very, very simply did not plug into the internet, right? Like if you wanted to stop
And my
drinking,
question to that, Kurt, is
yeah.
how well did that work out for people that chose not to? You can choose not to do AI. Let me know how that works out, because you don't know what product you're using that actually has AI built in. And if I can just build on that concept, take a look at when internet came out. Here in the province of New Brunswick, we had dial-up. So I remember when I first got it in 1998 at my house, and this is amazing. And there was something called Napster. You could do music and you would dial in. Now come forward. People didn't all have smartphones. Now smartphones came out. Now we're all on smartphones. Now we're all on high speed, and we're to the point that if we can't have it instantly and can't get instant gratification, the world is ending. That took 15 years, 20 years, let's say 25 years to get to that point. We don't have 25 years in the AI world. It's not going to take 25 years for the impact of AI. And that's what I'm trying to drive at. So any of us old fogies that remember where we were when we didn't really have internet and it first came out on dial-up, to where now we're so hooked to it and we need instant gratification. What's that going to look like in a year and a half? And what are the expectations of society? It's just going to continue. I see the potential this is going to continue to spiral out of control. And what can we do about it? Well, I'm not 100% sure what that would look like.
Some of the things that I think about just as we start to land this plane here, when it comes to whether it's self-regulation or government regulation, I think of myself with a backup hard drive for my computer. I installed it, I backed up when I bought it, and then the next time I think about backing it up is when something happens and my computer doesn't function the way it should. So that was, a year and a half later, not a single thing done in between. Now, I look at, for example, companies, and Scott, I'm sure you deal with this a lot, where they have a cybersecurity season of whatever awakening or reckoning because of an issue that they had with cybersecurity. They may implement their strategy going forward, and then they never adjust it, never update it. My fear with this is that we're going to see this happen with artificial intelligence. And Bianca, when you were talking about we're only talking about generative AI here primarily, I'd love for you to maybe highlight some of the other ones and how not being diligent at this from a personal perspective and from a corporate perspective, some of the risks that are out there with artificial intelligence on the other forms of AI.
Well, I'll just say that the category, if we think of the different types that I am the most concerned about, and it is in some ways not generative AI, is the decision making, the ones where you're automating a decision that used to be held by a person. And I think what's dangerous about that track is that even if the automation's working, then you're shifting into like, I'm babysitting a computer, or I'm having to check everything all the time. And then your capacity to actually catch a problem is reduced because you're looking at so many where you're like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And then you, the person, becomes the sponge for like, when it's working, it's the computer. When you miss something, it's you. That, like, for me is a really bad labor outcome of that type of AI use, which is more in the world of the decision-making and automation than the generative. Although you can still say, I'm going to use these tools to generate a report and then submit it, and you have the same problem. But I think like that bucket of like, if it's a decision is being taken on your behalf, to me, that's the one you circle with the big red pencil. Because some of the ones, like when I think about, if we want to talk about where I see people using things, like Translation is really helpful for people. In accessibility, transcription is really helpful if everybody's okay with something being transcribed. Image matching, searching for things that, like, if it's in a, whether it's an archival or a different, like, all of those things, those are all related to AI or machine learning. And they don't come with the same set of like issues as what we've been predominantly talking about here. So I hope those are helpful examples, because I know people use, I think like transcription is a really important one. Like, for example, if you're able to have more people join something because you address an accessibility need, like, you're not going to be like, no, we're not doing it because of X, right? So I think we have to be specific, but I'll just close on the decision-making ones. To me, are the big time. Watch it, because you're messing with where we have parked most of our legal thinking, which is in that relationship between parties or between a decision. So once you like kind of shove that into an automated system that you don't even understand, I think there's like a lot of trouble downstream, both in the legal concept, but also just in like, what does decent work look like? I don't want to babysit machines and check their work all day. Like, that's not a good work environment. And I don't think that's good for our society. So that's the way I would frame how to think about it a bit more expansively, or maybe specifically.
Bianca, we've now seen cases where we have AI fact-checking AI, and then that's being considered good enough.
Yeah.
Oh
No,
my
thank
God.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Layers.
It's such a huge topic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the talent and obvious work you guys have done individually to make sure that you can help guys like me and our listeners understand a little bit more about the risks. I like to give our guests an opportunity to let our listeners know what they're up to. And Bianca, why don't you go first? What have you got going on in your life right now?
Yeah, well, right now this is very timely to the conversation. Is why I was so happy to get to speak with both of you about this as well. Is like trying to figure out how to be helpful from the ground up on these issues. So I run T&S Advisory, and we're doing small scale, very narrow, engagement on how you're using technology in your organization or your business. So I love to do that kind of work and just come in, especially for companies that might not have someone thinking about like strategy or innovation with technology. Because a lot of people, they're getting pressure from all over the place, whether it's a board of directors or a funder or someone in management saying, how are you all using this? And it's like, yeah, you need a good answer to that question that isn't like, I'm not, or here's my not well thought out plan. So I'm doing that as a business, and I'm trying to help people structure some of the thinking and the decision making and build some of that policy and protocol that we've been talking about that needs to exist more ground up style. If you look at the URL innovatehow.com, that's a place where if you want to follow up with me, have a form just to like do a little intake, happy to have a conversation with someone if this is resonating, just to see if I could be helpful. So thanks for the opportunity to share that. And I'm excited to keep working on this issue with people that have the real world practical, what do we do here problem.
Right.
I'd like some help with.
Scott, how about you? What have you got going on in your life right now, and how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I'm still a practicing technology therapist, because as we've talked about during this session, technology was supposed to make our lives easier, faster, more profitable, but it's actually added more stress, more overhead, more risks, and more downsides or potential downsides. So I help write the prescriptions to help business owners move their companies forward securely, profitably, and just keep things running. CEO of Beck Tech. That's BECKTEK.ca. Kurt will put it in the comments down below. And we typically help small businesses, 10, 75 users, manage their IT, manage their risk, and make sure that they're implementing those things to drive their companies forward safely and securely.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. Again, we've just barely cracked the surface of this topic. But I think it's an important one, and again, one that we're going to continue to have. That's your episode of Irrational for this month. Don't forget, new episodes drop the 15th of every month, because we like to be right in the middle. This episode brought to you by New Bean Nation. It's Canada's freshest home delivery coffee service. Receive your coffee almost anywhere in Canada, 2 to 3 days off roast. Visit www.newbeannation.ca to learn about the products they offer, and if you use promo code Irrational, you'll get 15% off your first subscription box or your first order. Thank you for joining Irrational.